Some betrayals come with a knife. Mine came with a phone call from my own son on a Tuesday morning. While I was drinking coffee on a porch he thought he'd already taken from me. He was wrong. The call came at 8:14 in the morning. Brad's name lit up my screen, and the second I answered, I heard it in his voice. That careful tone people use when they've already made a decision for you. "Dad," he said, "Tim and I think it's time to sell the cabin." No discussion, no question, just a conclusion. I leaned back in the porch chair and looked out over the frozen fields beyond Harmon Ridge Road. Wisconsin fog still hung low across the ground, thick enough to blur the tree line. "The cabin?" I asked calmly. "The Kerr Lake place," he said quickly. "Property values are crazy right now. We talked to a realtor. He says we could get close to $400,000. A realtor? Before they even spoke to me, my sons had already met with an agent and discussed selling the one place on earth that still felt like Renee was alive. That cabin wasn't just wooden shingles. I built it myself in the summer of 1993, with my own hands, while Brad carried boards behind me and Tim hammered crooked nails into scrap pieces pretending to help. Every birthday, every deer season, every 4th of July somehow ended up there. And when Renee got sick years later, that cabin became sacred ground. Her final healthy summer was spent sitting on that dock with her feet in the water, while the boys grilled burgers nearby, pretending not to notice how weak she'd become. After she died in 2015, I kept going back because it was the only place where the silence still sounded like her. Now my son was talking about it like inventory. "Dad, you're 71, Brad continued. "It's too much upkeep for one person." I heard Tim in the background, but he stayed quiet. That told me everything. Tim always followed Brad's lead, even when he knew better. I asked one question. "When exactly did you two decide this was your call to make?" The silence on the other end stretched long enough to answer for them. Finally, Brad sighed. "We're just trying to do what makes sense." That sentence stayed with me after the call ended. What makes sense? Funny thing about greed is people almost never call it greed. They dress it up in practical language first. I sat alone on that porch for nearly an hour after hanging up. Not angry. Not yet. Just disappointed in a way that settles deep in your chest and stays there. Then I stood up, walked inside, and opened the bottom drawer of my kitchen cabinet. Renee used to call it my serious drawer because every important document in my life ended up there. Inside was a folder the boys knew nothing about. Different property, different lake, different future. I opened it slowly and stared at the deed for a long moment, before smiling to myself for the first time all morning. Because my sons thought Kerr Lake was the whole story. They had no idea there was another cabin, and they definitely had no idea what was about to happen next. If you've ever watched family change the second money enters the room, subscribe to the channel, because stories like this are becoming more common than people want to admit. 2 days after that first phone call, Brad called again. This time he sounded confident. Too confident. "Dad," he said, "we've already signed with the realtor. The cabin's officially listed." I looked down at my coffee and smiled a little to myself. He really thought this was done. "We already have showing requests," he continued. "Things are moving fast." Fast. That was Brad's problem his entire life. He moved before thinking. Even as a kid, he'd sprint downhill before checking where the rocks were. I let him talk. Then he made the mistake that changed everything. "You'll need to be out of the property by the end of the month." Not "could you," not "what do you think," a deadline. For me, in the cabin I built with my own hands. I stayed quiet long enough for him to grow uncomfortable. Then I asked him one question. "Brad, which cabin do you think I'm sitting in right now?" Silence. Heavy silence. "Dad, what does that mean?" "You'll find out soon enough," I said, and hung up. That afternoon I drove northeast through the pine roads outside Cedarville until I reached Garrison Lake, the second property, the one nobody knew existed. I bought it 6 months after Renee passed away, back when grief still felt sharp enough to cut through your ribs if you breathed wrong. Garrison wasn't like Kerr Lake. Kerr was loud, familiar, full of memories and family noise. Garrison was different. Quiet water, tall pines, a west-facing porch where the sunsets turned the entire lake gold every evening. The lodge sat elevated above the shoreline with a massive stone fireplace and enough land around it that nobody could accidentally wander onto your peace. That place saved me after Renee died, not because it erased the grief. Nothing does that. but because it gave me somewhere to sit with it honestly. And years earlier, I had quietly placed the entire property into an irrevocable trust under Renee's name. Untouchable. Protected. I told exactly one person about it. Walter Pruitt, retired county recorder, and the only man I trusted to keep his mouth shut. 3 weeks after Brad listed Kerr Lake, an offer came in for $382,000. A couple from Illinois wanted it immediately. Brad called me practically out of breath with excitement. "Dad, this is huge. We just need your signature at closing." There it was. The party never bothered checking before trying to sell my property. Because my name was still on the deed, and under Wisconsin law, no sale could happen without every co-owner signing. They had listed a cabin they legally could not sell. I could have stopped the process right there, could have explained it calmly over the phone, could have saved everyone embarrassment. But some lessons only work when people walk all the way into the consequences themselves. So I stayed quiet. The closing was scheduled for a Monday morning in Delafield. I arrived early. Brad walked in wearing his best navy jacket, looking proud of himself. Tim followed behind him, looking nervous enough to be sick. The buyers were already seated. So was the realtor. Everybody looked relaxed except me, because I was the only person in that room who knew the sale was about to collapse. My attorney, Raymond Castillo, texted me right at 9 o'clock. "Ready when you are." I stood up slowly and looked across the room. "Before we begin," I said calmly, "there's something everyone here needs to hear." Brad frowned immediately. "Dad, what are you doing?" I ignored him and handed my phone to the realtor. "Mr. Castillo would like a word." I watched the color leave that man's face in real time. His confident posture disappeared first, then his smile, then his voice. When he handed the phone back, he looked like somebody had just informed him his career was about to become extremely difficult. "The closing cannot proceed," he said quietly. The buyers froze. Brad stared at him. "What do you mean it can't proceed?" The realtor swallowed hard. "Your father never approved the transaction. Without unanimous consent, the property cannot legally be sold." The room went dead silent. I took a sip of coffee while Brad slowly turned toward me. That expression on his face, I'll never forget it. Not anger. Not yet. It was shock. Pure shock. Like a man realizing the floor beneath him had been fake the entire time. If you've stayed this far into the story, subscribe, because the next part is where my sons finally learn what impatience really cost them. The buyers left first. The realtor followed right behind them, looking like a man already rehearsing explanations for a lawsuit. Then it was just me, Brad, and Tim, sitting in that silent conference room, while the reality settled over everybody like heavy snow. Brad finally spoke. "I let this go all the way to closing." "Yes," I said calmly. "Why?" "Because hearing a lesson isn't the same as living one." I looked at both my sons for a long moment before reaching into my jacket pocket and placing a folded document on the table. "The Kerr Lake deed has been changed," I said. "As of yesterday, the property is entirely in my name again." Tim's face dropped instantly. Brad just stared. "You removed us." "You removed yourselves," I corrected gently. "The moment you treated family like a transaction." Then I told them about Garrison Lake, the lodge, the trust, the property neither of them knew existed, and finally, the number that made the room go completely still. Last month it was appraised at $1.1 million. Brad blinked hard. Tim actually covered his mouth. "That lodge was supposed to become your inheritance someday," I said quietly. "Split evenly between both of you." Neither of them spoke. Because suddenly the $382,000 cabin sale didn't feel like victory anymore. It felt small. Cheap. Short-sighted. I stood up and buttoned my jacket slowly. "You were so focused on grabbing what you thought was yours early," I said. "You never realized patience would have given you far more." Brad looked down at the floor. Tim wiped at his eyes. And for the first time that entire morning, they didn't look like grown men fighting over property. They looked like boys again. Boys who finally understood they had disappointed their father. If this story hit home for you, subscribe, because sometimes the most painful lessons in life arrive wrapped inside family.